All right, we are live. Hi, everybody. Welcome today. We are meeting today with the USCIS, former director of USCIS, Leon Rodriguez. Director, what is the best title for someone like you? Is it Director Leon or Director Rodriguez?
Generally, people call me Leon. Uh, so actually, that's probably the best title. But former director, I guess.
Former director is good. All right, we'll call you former Director Rodriguez. Um, and you were director from 2013 to 2017, is that right?
2014. I always
2014.
say 2014 until I actually waved goodbye to President Obama,
Oh, wow.
and that's where my service terminated on January 20th of 2017.
Wow. And the great news is that you're partnering with us here at BDV. We're going to work together on government relations issues to see what we can do to help not just our clients, but individuals in general in the immigration system. So we're really excited to have you on board and excited to be working with you. And our clients will be excited as well. Um, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about how does one become director of USCIS and how did you become director of USCIS?
So immediately before being USCIS director, I was the director of something called the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Health and Human Services, which has two roles. One is to enforce the civil rights laws that protect participants in HHS funded programs and also enforcing the healthcare privacy laws. That really, for me, came after a career uh, in law enforcement. I was a federal
Mhm.
prosecutor. I was a white collar defense lawyer for a period of time, and actually had a relationship with now Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, who's a good friend. I'd known him for years. We were both happened to be from Cuba. Our families from Cuba, and so when he was stepping down from being USCIS director, my immediate predecessor, and ascending to be deputy secretary, he and I had a conversation, and that led to my agreeing to put my hat in the ring to be director of USCIS. It was a Senate confirmed position, so I had to go before committee. I testified, I criticized by some of the senators, and eventually got to a floor vote and got the job.
Awesome. And tell us a little bit about what is it like to be director of USAIS? How big is this organization? Give us a sense of this machine that you used to be in charge of.
So at the time that I was director, it was a organization of 19,000 people in 250 offices across the globe. So in addition to our U.S. presence, we had presence in Frankfurt, in Shanghai, in
Hmm.
Seoul, Korea, in India, all of South Africa, Greece, Italy, all over the world, and doing many different things. So one is sort of the employment-based
Hmm.
process that the folks on this call know about and are participating in, but also humanitarian immigration, refugees, and asylees. Something that right now, with what's going on in Ukraine and Afghanistan, is commanding a lot of international attention, and family-based, which is the largest of the categories. So in total, 8 million, at that time, 8 million cases a year. That's grown actually since my departure to 10 million cases a year that are handled by the agency. So it's a really complex organization. It's one that interestingly is still operating in pretty antiquated ways. It's not has not reached the level of automation that an agency of the breadth of its mission should have reached.
Hmm. And so there are 10 million visa cases. Did you ever know about EB3 unskilled before as a director? Is that something that
Not
came up?
really. So that's sort of an interesting discussion that I know that you and I have had, Chris, which was, you know, EB3 was not generally seen as a uh, good thing or a bad thing that would reach the office of the director.
Mhm.
It's a relatively, I mentioned, 8 million cases.
Yeah, it's only
There are
10,000.
6,000 EB3 cases in
Yeah.
a typical year. There are 10,000 possible cases, and there are only
Mhm.
6,000. So it's a really small part of the overall business of the agency. And it's one that was generally handled at a staff level, not handled generally at my.
Mhm. So if you heard about us, it probably wasn't going to be for something good. If you heard about EB3 unskilled or any visa category, it had to be something really, really important then.
Correct. And look, to be honest, the first I learned about the EB3 category was once I was in private practice, the EB3 unskilled, in talking about various kinds of integrity concerns that were raised about the EB3 category, particularly um, some operators in the industry who are seen as less than scrupulous,
Mhm.
and so that's how I first learned about the E3
Mhm.
category, and that that you guys later after that experience.
Mhm. Great, and that's a feather in our cap as BDV, because you've heard about these our competitors and these other people out there who aren't the most honest and ethical in this field. But we're working with you, and we're really excited to be doing so. Now, you talked a little bit about the backlogs. How does to the extent that you remember or can discuss it, what is like the day to day of in the life of a case, right? Like, let's say that I file an I-140, file a 485. Like, how does that work internally? Does it go to someone's desk? Does that sit on that person's desk forever and a day? Could you talk a little bit about how that works internally?
Yeah, so there's different stops that a case makes along the way. So generally, um, first of all, you can sort of imagine what the mailroom looks like
Yeah.
at a place with 10 million cases a year. That in and of itself is a complex and interesting operation. Actually, it's kind of all the things that were done to control the mail and make sure it doesn't get lost and goes to the right
Mhm.
place and all that. But then before every case has to ultimately be reviewed by an immigration services officer and a decision made on that case by an immigration services officer.
Mhm.
However, there are a number of stops that it needs to make along the way before it even gets to an officer. So first,
Mhm.
if there's a fee that's associated with that case, that fee needs to sort of be, pulled out and deposited. Then the case is reviewed to see whether just sort of the basic pieces of the application are there. And that's not with an immigration services officer. That'll be in they're called the drop box, these big processing centers,
Mhm.
where they basically are looking at the cases to see if all the basic pieces of paper and all the fields are entered that need to be entered. And if they're not, they'll be what is called rejected, different than denied,
Mhm.
which means they don't even consider in that situation whether you should or should not get your benefit. So once you sort of pass that stage, then there are checks done on the individuals who are seeking whatever the benefit may be, and those are focusing on um, two basic kinds of issues. One are public safety and national security. Do you have a criminal record? Do you pop up somewhere as a national security threat or potential threat? And also the travel history. Is there travel history that in some way adversely affects your eligibility uh, for this application? Once you clear those, and only once you clear those, you actually end up on the desk of an immigration services officer.
Oh, wow.
So that's a process, going along all of those stops that can take a number of months.
Oh, wow. And one of the big things that we hear at BDV and other organizations is that some people will file their cases in 2021 and get an answer back. They'll get their green card in like 9 months or 10 months. Other people file 4 or 5 years ago and still don't know of anything and haven't heard anything from USCIS. What are some of the causes for that? Why would somebody who filed earlier have to wait longer than someone who files sooner?
So generally, a case that is sitting around that long, and it all has to be sort of benchmarked with how long our cases generally take. So right now we are sort of a historical backlog level.
Hmm.
Horrible. We were struggling with that when I was director. My successors in the Trump administration struggled more, and unfortunately, the folks there now are struggling even more. So you're benchmarking and how long is a typical case of that
Hmm.
type taking. So let's say it's an I-485.
Hmm.
You look on the chart, they tell you, I don't know exactly how much the wait is now, but let's say it's 24 months for the wait. If you're
Or
waiting,
19 to 45 months. It's what
there
they're
we go.
saying on the Texas Service
So,
Center
you know,
website.
if you're waiting more than 45 months, there's something specific is going on with your application. It's not just that there's backlog. And there's basically generally two issues, or let's say three issues that will cause it to take that long. Issue number one, the ones that really make cases sit around for a long time, are national security issues
Mm.
that are less than obvious ones. Meaning, if there's a database that says you are a terrorist, then your
Yeah,
case will simply be denied.
yeah.
But generally, that's not what happens.
Hmm.
What happens national security wise is there's a database that says that one day you had a cell phone call that the U.S. government thinks,
Mm.
for whatever reason, is a little bit of a bad guy, but that we're not sure whether that makes you a bad guy. So what we're going to do about your case is nothing at all.
Hmm.
We're just going to let it sit until somehow something happens that clears up our concerns about you. And those are
Interesting.
the cases that can sit there for a really, really long time. That's one.
Hmm.
Two is if there's something about your case that gives the officers concern that there is fraud being
Hmm.
committed. That's another kind of case that can sit for a long time. And then third is if there's some factual legal issue that somehow they're not able to resolve. So those are the things that will cause them to wait a really, really long time beyond the
Hmm. The
post
normal.
times. And those post processing times are just because that's how long the line is
Hmm. Hmm.
for an officer to look at cases.
Mm. In consular, it's the same exact thing in consular, where if your name even comes close to somebody else's name, oh my God, your case will be stuck forever. And the officers actually don't have much power in those situations because it has to be cleared by somebody else outside of consular. Um, and also if the officer has any kind of concerns. But the I think the difference for us though is we move every 2 years as consular officers, and so sometimes someone's working on a case and then the next day someone's working on a different case because the case gets reassigned, and then that next person is just not a priority for them, and so cases often get lost in the shuffle. Is that does USCIS have any similar kind of rotational system? Do cases stay with an officer forever, or do they move around to different officers?
Cases move around for different reasons. One, officers can decide. I don't want to do employment based anymore. I'd rather do family based, or I don't
Mm.
want to do family based. I'd rather do employment based, or I want to travel the world, so I want to become a refugee services officer.
Mhm.
Their officers move around because they want to move around,
Mhm.
but then also officers are moved around whenever um, there is a reason to prioritize a particular caseload.
Mhm.
So, for example, every once in a while they'll say, we really want to pick up a case on U.S. citizenship in
Mhm.
400. So we're going to move officers from I-485s and we're going to move them over to N400. So that means that those officers will take the I-485 case, they'll give them to somebody who already had a full caseload,
Mhm.
and they'll move over to do N400 cases.
Mm.
So that can be moving around just because there's reprioritization or because there's backlogs in a particular area, and so they'll be moved around. So there's a decent amount of cases moving around among
Mhm.
officers, and you cannot assume that a case will have the same officer throughout.
Right. Right.
So, good
It's
question.
interesting. So on the On the receipt numbers, or when you get an RFE or something, it'll say, Officer 1542 or something like that on it. Now, is Officer 1542 always going to be Officer 1542, or are there different officers that are going to be Officer 1542?
No, I mean, Officer 1542 is a specific person.
And it'll be that person forever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
But that can, that it won't necessarily be right. That number will correspond to that individual forever. That may not be. That when you see that on a request for evidence, for example, that may not be the same officer who's ultimately decided the case.
Oh, so that's interesting. So a lot of lawyers, they'll make like whole charts and spreadsheets based on that officer. But what you're saying is that that officer 1542 isn't necessarily always going to be the one to make the decisions on those.
Right. The case might go to somebody else for a number of different reasons. It might go
That's
to
interesting. Now, I'm sure that you talked to the current USCIS director and those current guys over there. And, what advice do you give them, or what advice do you give to people in government about how to deal with these huge backlogs of green card cases and the huge backlogs of EAD cases?
Yeah, the most important advice that I give them is that they need to look at the financial planning process for the agency
Mm-hmm.
to really effectively predict
Mm-hmm.
what their future caseloads are and how much resources and to plan those resources in advance. Here's the thing, we talk about a lot about the immigration services officers. From the time that you get it into your head that you want to hire 1, 10, 100, 400 immigration services officers, to the time that any one of those officers becomes a fully functioning immigration services officer is about a year.
Mm-hmm.
You need to recruit them, you need to screen them, you need to onboard them, then you need to train them. They go to an actual law enforcement academy to train. And then they go through a period where their work has to be heavily scrutinized and they're kind of getting their CLETs. So all that is a very long period of time. So let's say it's January 2022, you decide, we have X number more cases this year, therefore we need Y number more officers. By the time that year is over, you're going to need even more officers because whatever you thought was going to be your caseload at the beginning of that year, already your caseload has increased dramatically over the course of the year. So what I think USCIS needs to do is to have a recruitment process and a resource allocation process that recognizes that the things are only ever going up. And I point to the fact that everybody thought Donald Trump was going to shut down U.S. immigration. He didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It just kept growing, even with Trump in office. So they really have to assume that the resource need is just going to keep growing in how they model, and not be budgeting based on what was 2 years ago. They need to really budget on what's going to be a year from now.
Oh. And what can and then we're going to open it up to some questions. We're going to have the questions are going to be posted on the screen and we can read them together. But what are some things that an employer specifically or a client can do to find out about their case? To, if your case is stuck in administrative, on consular we call it administrative processing, but clearly USCIS has its own version of that. If your case has just been pending for a really long time, and if you're a petitioner or a beneficiary, what are some things you think that people can do to get some information?
So getting information, even for me, is pretty hard. Actual information other than, your case is pending, we're looking at your request for evidence. So that is difficult. But there are things you can do to sort of poke the case to find out what's going on. One thing that I have done a few times, and this is when the wait times have become very extreme, is I actually sue USCIS. So
mandamus, yeah.
The former director of USCIS has sued USCIS a few times. And what is fascinating about the times that I have done that is that and I waited. I would not do this,
Hmm.
because it's one day over the process.
Right.
This has to be an extreme case.
Hmm.
Um, Within a month, sometimes within a week, case actually gets approved.
That makes sense, right?
Um,
Because like if the former USCIS director is suing you saying that you're being unreasonable,
oh,
then
I don't think I'm special in that way. I think that's something that's a lot of immigration lawyers will tell
yeah.
you similar. Immigration litigators will tell you
Hmm.
similar stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mine. But then, the other thing is once in a while you are able to have a conversation with somebody, either, by text, by email, some way, some other way, you are able to get a little shred of information about it.
Hmm.
But the most effective way to kind of get
Yeah.
that visibility is just to
So
report.
yeah, yeah, I know that a lot of we've done that to some success. I know a lot of other lawyers are doing that. And in fact, when I was talking to one of my friends in consular affairs about this, they have like 20 or 30,000 mandamus lawsuits. And when you guys moved your office out of the DC district and over into Maryland, like the Fourth Circuit was like, whoa, where are all these cases coming from? But yeah, mandamus is it's been definitely a tool that's been used, but with 9 million green card backlogs, I just don't, obviously not everyone can sue. What are some of the big policy things you think that the government can do to get these backlogs dealt with?
So there's two things that I think do, and I have actually discussed this with the new leadership. And I'll admit this was something that I resisted when I was director because it just seemed like it would be a process that would consume the whole agency.
Hmm.
There's two issues that I think need to really be examined. One is the request for evidence process,
Hmm.
and to essentially quality control of requests for evidence.
Hmm.
A lot of times there are requests for evidence that USCIS already has,
Yes, all the time.
or requests for evidence for information that USCIS most definitely does not need
Right.
in order
Or
to
not
make
entitled to either. They're
what's
not
that,
entitled. They're not entitled to it either.
or that they're not entitled to. That
Yeah.
that's yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Category number three. So that's one.
Hmm.
Two, I think that I think I mentioned in the beginning, my background is as a prosecutor. So
Hmm.
uh, I grew up as a lawyer in a world where the standard of proof was beyond a reasonable
Hmm.
doubt, right? Um, the world that immigration services officers live in is a world where the standard is preponderance of the evidence, a much
Right.
lower
Hmm.
standard than we as criminal prosecutors have. Having said that, I see USCIS officers either in request for evidence or in denials
Hmm.
applying what really is the standard
Beyond
of proof
reasonable. Yep.
that I faced as a prosecutor.
Yep.
So, for example, completely discounting a statement from the petitioner
Right.
with no basis to think that the petitioner is not credible, they
Hmm.
completely discount it as it just doesn't count. It simply doesn't count
Hmm.
unless you have documentary evidence that corroborates what you're saying. That's not standard evidence.
Hmm.
If you have no reason to disbelieve the petitioner, you're bound to accept the truth of what the petitioner is saying
Hmm.
and give it credit. So that's an example of the way that I think they need to really look differently at how they're applying their evidentiary standards.
Hmm. And do you think, to the extent that you can, and then I'm going to open it up for questions for real this time, do you think that, the USCIS leadership changed from you to Francisco Cisna, and then it was that guy, that governor of Virginia, Kim Cuccinelli. The rank and file 19,000, do you think that they are more aligned with you or more aligned with with them, or with Leon, with Cisna and Cuccinelli's way of thinking about this stuff?
Yeah, I think honestly, there is a spectrum. The
Hmm.
one thing though is I think the thing that most animates, I think most widely animates a lot of officers. The thing I heard them talk to me about whenever I would do town halls with officers was their concerns about integrity and about the honesty
Hmm.
of petitions. So does that put him more in Cuccinelli's camp and in Sisma's camp, or more in mine? I don't know, but I can't
Mhm.
say that that is a big issue for them. And they were kind of like, they're a little bit almost paranoid, you could say,
Mm.
about what they see as potential credibility concerns with many, many cases.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's the same with consular as well. I don't think consular was, they're not one way or the other. They're just very concerned about the process, and they don't really care about customer service. It's more about like, well, this person, everyone thinks that they're like the mini FBI. That's what it was in consular. Every officer thought they were an FBI agent, and they just wanted to investigate everybody and make sure they watch all these crime TV shows, and they want to be the ones to make the big bust.
Right, and that's most of USCIS. The one difference, and this is a way I think in which USCIS is fundamentally different than consular, is that in the field offices where
Hmm.
green card, the I-485 is adjudicated, and the N-400, the citizenship applications, where they actually are face to face. The First of all, the setup is different. You actually sit in a chair,
Hmm.
across a desk, and so there is an intimacy in that environment that makes it a much less a warmer interaction, if
Hmm.
you will, than I think it is in the consular
Mm. That's true.
environment. And they are, it shows in the results. So if those cases have an easier time than the ones that are handled in service centers, which
Hmm.
are like these massive warehouses, very impersonal, and all it is a file. There's no sense of there being human being
Mm.
behind that file.
Interesting. Let's see. I don't know if Mitchell is on, but Mitchell, can you post some questions for us?
Hey,
Hey.
Director Rodriguez. Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
You know, great. I'm Mitchell Som. I'm the sales director at BDV Solutions. I was going to just pop on some questions here that we got during the feed, but a lot of them are really pretty specific, and I don't necessarily know if they're suitable. So I'm just going to come on and ask you some questions just as I've been watching.
Okay.
I deal a lot with like our clients specifically, so I think first of all, you're the former director of USCIS, so you've dealt with a lot of immigrants in your lifetime, definitely. So, do you just have any words of wisdom for someone going through this process? Not specifically EB3 unskilled, but maybe any sort of immigration process.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think one word of wisdom is that you are as much the owner of your process as whoever your representative is. Um, Whether it's a lawyer, whether it's a recruitment outfit, I think it's a partnership, and I think it's important to always view that as a partnership. The other, and I think this is um, I'll analogize to my prosecutorial days. I would work with a lot of homicide detectives. Homicide detectives would see dead bodies every single day, so they became desensitized. You forget the amount of emotion that's associated with that, right? And there's an element of this. I'm a child of refugees. My parents came to this country as immigrants, so that story is part of my personal DNA. But for most officers, they and even a lot of lawyers don't realize what all the folks on this call, that this is your whole life. This is your future is bound up in this application. They're not, that's not uppermost in their mind. And so they're going to be in a different emotional place about your process than you are. For you, this is your whole life. For them, this is just, you might as well be at the Division of Motor Vehicles. I mean,
Hmm.
that's sort of the level of importance that they're putting into it. And I think just sort of understanding that difference and realizing that it's reality, I think is something that can create a certain amount of peace as you try to move through this
Hmm.
process.
Definitely. I think we have like obviously just a lot of different people from a lot of different places. They're all kind of undergoing the same process, and it could be incredibly, incredibly stressful for them. obviously, when you have this kind of volume of client base like BV has, we have, some clients that get through the process really quick, minimal problems, maybe no RFE. And so, they go and they have a great experience. And then there's other people who, could even be the same employer that's sponsoring them that, just have a ton of roadblocks along their journey. And so, yeah, it could definitely be frustrating. Chris, is there anything that you can think of here that maybe from our client's perspective that maybe they would want to know from Leon? Actually, I did have one thing that I wanted to ask. Obviously, as the director of USCIS, I'm not sure kind of where your responsibilities lie there, but did you see in your time at USCIS a lot of like fraudulent activity in the employment-based category of immigration? Did you see a lot of cases come through where people were tricked or maybe paid a consultant or some company to help them and they ended up getting themselves in a tough
No,
situation?
definitely not. No, I mean, to be really, and every time there was a fraud prosecution, they would send a press release to my, I would get it. That's a tiny minority of the cases, and one in which sort of, what I would call sort of institutional players, either the more sophisticated recruitment companies or the more sophisticated employers, generally you wouldn't see that kind. That would be really rare.
Yeah.
There's no percentage in it. There's because of, there's plenty of people. One thing I don't think we have to ever worry about is that there are plenty of really talented people that want to come to the United States and work in the United States. So there's just no reason. It's fraud. You're gonna do fine without it. From an employer perspective, you're gonna get what you need without that.
Definitely, that makes sense. And then I don't know, Chris, if you had anything else, but this is going to be the last thing from me, I think. And obviously, here at BDV, we come from this realm of this obscure kind of sub visa category, which is the EB3 unskilled. And I think during your time while you were director at USCIS, honestly, I don't think there were as many EB3 unskilled cases coming through, particularly adjusting status people in the United States that were primarily dealing with USCIS. I think that consular definitely during those years saw maybe a little bit more action on the EB3 unskilled side. And so, but I think now, from the time that you left 2017, that's actually when I started working here at BDV, the number of EB3 unskilled cases is going up and up and up and up. So I think that maybe that this category will be something that is maybe more on the radar for USCIS, and maybe it's something that they haven't really seen a whole lot of, but I think that there's going to be a big wave coming, definitely.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think one of the things that's kind of crashing down on us as a reality is that it was in vogue in both parties to think about immigration purely in high skilled terms. We need software engineers, scientists, and that's great, but you don't run an economy just on that. You need people to manage grocery stores, manage restaurants, and be welders and do landscaping and all that. And I think we're waking up to the realization, because of the way that the pandemic has sort of shifted where our workforce is, we don't have enough people in the United States right now, work eligible people, to do the jobs that are actually available. And so I think that is pushing a realization that we need to rethink our logic of how our categories are defined, how our categories are prioritized. Think a little bit more deeply about those things.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Well, unless anybody has any other final questions or Thank you so much, Director Rodriguez, or former Director Rodriguez. We
Thank
hope to
you.
have more of these as we see Congress or the White House do some actions, and maybe we can get your reaction to some of those reactions as they come out.
I did just get a few. I'm sorry to cut off. I just got a couple here that I do think might be a little bit relevant for you. But so here's a question that we got: does making a status inquiry impact the case at all, or help the case at all? Like for people that are waiting a really long time from USCIS, if they inquire about it, is that going to
I
do
don't
anything
think
for them?
hurts. I don't think it really hurts at all. I think it unfortunately doesn't help that much either, unless it's a case that's become very extreme. By the way, the other way to get information that I omitted, there's two other ways. One is using something called the ombudsman, which is sort of a customer service watchdog over the over USCIS, and the other is using members of Congress and having them make inquiries. Sometimes those actually are able to kind of nudge cases, off neutral.
Okay.
Cool. All right. I think that's it for me.
Perfect. Thanks, Mitchell. And thanks, Leon. I'll call you Leon. Thanks, Leon, for everything. And we will be in touch for our next maybe Facebook Live down the road as we see Congress or the president do some actions on immigration.
All right. Excellent seeing you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for watching as well. Bye-bye.